Well, that felt abrupt. That's right. It would be nice if the music would like bleed over into here we are on screen, but it doesn't. The tool doesn't allow that, Sharon. So,
I like it. It's cool. Well, good morning and welcome back to the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living or is part of that ecosystem in any way. So if you have been, are, or will be anything like a project manager, a program manager, an operations manager, a group manager, maybe own your own business, maybe do your own thing, maybe you're an independent consultant, where you wear all the hats, then this series is definitely for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I will explore what not to do as you manage projects. It'll make a little more sense if you watch more episodes of this as we go through and talk about the areas. But in each episode of Project Failure Files, we talk about some of the common pitfalls in project management. We share our personal stories and experiences, and sadly, we have experiences and personal stories about every single topic we cover. And we're going to then explore some of the strategies and best practices to help you to be successful. So this is the what not to do in project management and why, with practical examples and best practices.
And a little fun along the way.
That we try.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about ignoring stakeholder feedback, a path to isolation. And basically with the importance of feedback loops and feedback in general and communication in general in everything you do, how important that is for everything for projects.
Yeah, before we got started here, Sharon and I were talking backstage about some of the examples we're going to share today. But I wish I could say that I haven't been on projects where that lack of communication and listening to customer or employee, more often employee, feedback has led to failure. So I've been in many of those projects. And of course, feel free to comment throughout these episodes, share your experiences. I'll be sharing links here through the banners with how to contact us and to participate in the community discussion. And of course, you can go visit us on YouTube and on the Buckley Planet YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find all the past episodes as well.
All right, let's get going. So, and one of the fun things about this as we've been going is sometimes we come up with words that people may or may not know. And, that's a fancy buzzword. So if you get your buzzword bingo card out and you want to maybe go for the word stakeholder this time, you probably win the game. But what exactly do we mean by stakeholder feedback? Why does it matter? Why is it crucial? What is that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, unless you are your own, this is the way I start out. Unless it's your own company and the project result is just for you, you are the only stakeholder. Everything else that you do for your job, the stakeholders are not you, most likely. And so the stakeholders might be, your customers, your partners. It might be the various departments in your organization. And so I think of the way that as I've run project teams and governance bodies, the stakeholders are those that are everyone who has a voice in the delivery of and the result of that solution. And so that's why it's important to, if you're going to go and having been most of my career in IT, as an example, it's always critical to make sure that it's not just IT that's making the decisions, that we have our executive owner, that stakeholder. We have marketing and sales and operations and support and all of these other organizations that are part of that. They may not be directly, but they might be indirectly impacted by the way that you approach the project and the result of that project. So that's the meta version of stakeholders.
Yeah. And in fact, I think every methodology, every project methodology, every kind of form of formal project management has some step where you identify and define the stakeholders for every single project, interaction, rollout, deployment, whatever you want to call it. I've spent my entire career in IT as well, although for about half of my career, I worked with like companies who made software, mostly so software development. I sat on the back end making it. And for the second half of my career, I moved over into the business. And so I was supporting the business units to kind of deliver things day to day, but I was kind of like that extended technology arm to help them do what they needed to do. And I think no matter what project you're talking about, there's always this point at which, you really want to define who are the stakeholders on this project and what are they responsible for, and what communication do we want to have with those stakeholders to make sure that everybody's, participating in the project the way that they should.
Yeah. I've got a great example here too. About 15 years ago, I left Microsoft. I went to work for a small independent software vendor, ISV, that was doing SharePoint migration software. And the great examples, I would talk with prospect customers or existing customers that were getting ready to do a migration from one version of SharePoint to another, or from a non-SharePoint over to a SharePoint environment, and would use our technology. Is that I would ask that question of like, who are the key stakeholders around this? And so many of those projects where it was being IT led and they were just moving the content across, and I would give them advice. I said, you should go get the stakeholders involved. And they're like, well, like, who should we involve? I said, well, who knows the most about the data that you're getting ready to migrate? The owners of that data. That would be the stakeholder. Like, to not involve the people that use that technology to then go and validate whether the migration was successful or not, whether all the data moved across, whether their applications, the data they use on a daily basis is still there. That's a great example. You can't be so vain as to think that you're going to know every answer to every question that comes up, whether you're deploying a new technology, you're doing a migration, you're whatever it is, you're planning an event. You're not going to know all the answers. You need to go and talk to the people that are the subject matter experts, your stakeholders.
Yeah. I always, we do a ton of migrations, and I always use the analogy of migrations as kind of like moving houses or moving apartments. When you move homes, because people don't understand, like, what is a migration? What does that mean? And what's really funny about this is that we use the analogy of, if you're going to pack all your stuff up and move it over, and getting prepared for that and what that looks like. And I think this extends to that exact story, because it'd be like if you're like, I want to move my house, and literally a moving company just shows up whenever they feel like it, anytime, night or day. They pack your stuff up and however they wanted to, at whatever schedule they wanted to. They moved it to the other home in whatever order and whatever schedule they wanted to. And on the other side, they put it wherever they want, however they want, in whatever way they want, and didn't ever really talk to you about it. And anytime you're like, hey, what's going on? They're like, oh yeah, we're working on that. Maybe next Saturday. Yeah. I mean, if you had that same conversation and you think about it that way, it sounds insane to think that anybody would do that, but we do that in technology all the time.
Yeah. I was just thinking of other examples of where we're ignoring stakeholder. So I've been in a couple projects where it was like the CIO that made the decision and dropped it on everybody. Think of one specific customer experience, very large financial services organization. I was flown cross country. I was over from, at the time, where was I living? I was in Washington, and was flown over to Connecticut and in Stamford. So I won't say the name of the company, but that may help some people to identify who it was. But where the executive team hired a CIO to come in to change things. And he made an executive decision on completely swapping out the technology. And for those that, this is a few years back, but it was moving from IBM and Lotus Notes over to the Microsoft stack. Not a small transition. But he made the executive decision without any discussion, without any feedback, and he put an arbitrary date on it will be done by. Well, what if you want to talk about the employees, like the rioting that occurred inside that organization. It was not pretty. It didn't match the timeline. It happened, but one of the effects of that was that people quit. And so they had a huge wave of turnover around this abrupt change. So there was no feedback session. There's no discussion around it. It's fine if the executive team wants to make that make a decision and roll it out by edict, but you still need to take that feedback and understand the scenarios, what the impact will be, what the time will actually be, and put together a realistic time frame for that transition.
Yeah, I've unfortunately seen so many, more often than not, I've seen so many things like that where there's been changes or implementations or projects where there's been limited to no communication, which ultimately ends up causing stakeholder frustration and mistrust and lack of moving forward in a lot of those things, and it's difficult. And what's really interesting is I did a workshop with Simon Hudson at the North American Collaboration Summit last year, and we did this workshop on the maturity model, and we were basically talking to people about what that was and how it works and how it's to implement it. And we did this exercise, and what was really fascinating to us was we looked at all the different areas, all the different competency areas. And the one that had the biggest gap and the biggest miss and the biggest frustration area was communication. And we've had this conversation several times since, but we've really come to realize how crucial communication is for maturity, right? Like, so the more mature you are, the better you're communicating, the more you're doing, the better you're doing at it. And so I could see that the lower level you are in that maturity area, probably the more problematic and the more frustrating those types of things are going to be.
Well, the less likely you are to have a formal communication plan in place and go through that process. And I know that it's as PMs, when I go in and do a deployment, I mean, that communication is part of the model. So it's part of the methodology. Even during the initial planning and discovery phases, I always like to say, like, here's what I recommend. What's typical here? And it's always pleasant when you run into a customer that said, no, we actually have kind of a communication model for change and stuff. They're like, excellent. So let's leverage that model and move it in. But if they don't, to have it as part of your methodology, have it as part of your approach for any new project. And there's always that. I mean, at the bare minimum, it's the announcement, like, hey, this project is coming up. Here's what we think the impacts are. Because there's always the question, like, well, who are the stakeholders? Well, some of them you may think, okay, we're going to have departmental leads, but there could be different people or different subgroups within those departments that may say, hey, wait a second, this is a larger impact, this change to us. We also need to be involved. And so they may, self-elect themselves to join the discussion. So it's a refining process of who needs that. I mean, of course, you can announce it to the entire company and just blast it out there. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's a mechanism for that. It might be that there's an internal monthly newsletter and say, hey, I've seen companies that do this very well. Like, here's this project that's coming up, and here's what we think the impact will be of this project. Please, if you have feedback of this, talk to your manager or come talk to the PM. Here's the email around that. So there are definitely strategies for identifying the stakeholders and but always having some kind of framework for that communication. So, like, what's kind of standard when you think of like a client now, Sharon? What's the how often are you communicating with those customers?
I mean, I think my goal is, if I have an active project, I'd like to be touching base with them a minimum of once a week. If they're not as active, or maybe they're more in the maintenance and support phase, I'd say maybe once a month. And I know, on the other side of this, I have worked with many, many, many places, both as an employee and as a contractor, that have do have effective communication strategies in place. And I can tell you it's definitely a different feeling when, they're saying, hey, we know this thing is upcoming. We want to share this information out. Maybe they're putting it on their digital media boards. Maybe they're putting it, like you said, if they have, ongoing newsletters, internal. Sometimes they have media newsletters. Sometimes they have paper newsletters still. I know that there are places that distribute like quarterly newsletters. Sometimes they have an intranet and they're publishing on the intranet in their stories and their intranets. And I think, those types of places that I've been where I see that type of communication take place, those people are a lot happier. They're a lot more in the know. They know who to talk to. They know how to go, who to reach out to if they are having issues or have questions. And so we try to take that approach for all of our clients. And obviously, I think the difficult part with being a consultant is we're a little bit at the mercy of the internal communication structure that's in our client's structure. So we always try to advise to, be as mature as possible in that area. But then us internally, we really try to, at least internally, like I said, touch base, once a week on active clients and active projects, and then once a month on current clients that maybe are in a support model or in a maintenance model where maybe we're not doing a specific like implementation or something. And then what's really interesting is even clients that maybe we've had in the past that we might not be doing any active work for, we even try to touch base on those every couple months where we go and kind of chat and say, okay, where is this client at? Is there something we can help them with? I haven't heard from them in a little while. Is there anything we can do for them? And so I think, just keeping up with some sort of regular cadence on anything is usually helpful.
It's funny. I know we were talking about this before we started the episode, but that there's with marketing campaigns, there is a certain, you've got nurturing that's others. Part of any marketing campaign has that. You might have for your customers just a general slow drip nurturing campaign. Highly effective. And exactly, they might be the projects have been done. They were a former client. They're not active right now, but keeping that line of communication open. So when another question comes up, another opportunity to work together happens, you're fresh in their mind. Why are we not doing that internally? Some organizations do that. But here's what's going on. I was just thinking of, as you were talking about, like that regular cadence for communication. Number of times where I've had, running project management offices, PMO, where that's that program level view of everything that's in the pipeline. It's updated in real time. As there are changes, people are in there every day making edits to that. But on a weekly basis, we're sending out email that summarized and then had links back to the details of that, to the overall dashboard, the detail within each one of those. That's going out weekly. Plus, we had PMs that were sending to their stakeholders for their projects, the updates to go to that. And what we were finding is nobody was going to that centralized repository of all that information. And so part of, as a PM, and I would always ask, I was like, what's the best way to communicate with each of the stakeholders? And I would push back on some stakeholders that would ask for frequency. I said, look, that this is one of 5 projects that I'm working on. And so I'm providing this weekly. Could we, and so kind of negotiate to that, but have that discussion around it. What I often found is that they would say, those clients would say, well, it'd be great if we just had a one place I could go and look for the updates. I said, I wouldn't approach it negatively and say like, well, that's already existed. You've never been there.
I got a link for you.
I said, yeah, let me put something together. And then I would send them like a day later, hey, check out the dashboard where from our conversation. This is fantastic. This is what I've wanted.
Glad I could be the
try not to roll the
deliverer
eyes,
of your dreams.
Yes, the thing that was already there. You're welcome. Yeah.
And speaking of that, I want to kind of do a shout out for Microsoft. So I know sometimes like we do tend to kind of pick on them quite a bit. But I really am excited. If you guys haven't been to the new adoption.microsoft.com site, with the rollout of Copilot, this is something I think they did very, very right. If you go out to the Copilot area on there, they legit have entire communication templates, strategies, presentations, all the way down to printed materials and tablecloths. I mean, like, your whole campaign in a box for deployment and rollout and readiness is all already out there in PDF form and presentation form. There's a whole kit, the Copilot Success Kit. They've got a Copilot Launch Day Kit. And I think that's huge, because that's something that's like, hey, look, we're going to give this to you. I know this is hard. I know deploying something is hard. So we're going to put this resource out there for you to use. And I just think that's invaluable to really recognize that this is a big area of frustration for companies, and to be able to create that and put that out for people. So I'm just going to give them a little shout out, because I think it's cool.
I will say that the only ones that do it as good or better, that because Microsoft has improved a lot, I agree with you. Is Salesforce does a fantastic job around that in their communication.
That's
but
awesome.
It just goes back to, I mean, so early on in my career, like my second job, I was contracting, doing work for ADT, so the alarm company, as the parent company. C&K Systems was doing a lot of documentation, was in looking at, with the deployment, the release of a new product, and kind of looking at it. And I found that I kept getting asked by my manager to like do these piecemeal things. And I just kind of put it together in a logical workflow. And then I use that same process. I just remember having the conversation with the manager, was just after using it a couple of times, like, well, what is that? And I went and just created, I didn't know to call it a workflow. In fact, it was like a swimming lane model, which I had utilized. And I just kind of drew it out and shared that example. And he thought it was fantastic. He's like, shared it with the rest of the teams and the other analysts and writers, tech writers around that. It was like, here's a repeatable process for going and doing that. So again, that's why having that framework, and there's a lot out there suggested that might be industry based, that are based on the technology, the tools that you're using, but have something that's in place. And as I always say, that you always say, it's like, I don't care what methodology that you use, just have a methodology, so that you are asking the questions that aren't top of mind, but in a structured approach and way. And the more that people then interact with you, your internal and external customers and partners, they become accustomed that they trust in you and that process, because they know that there's a process, there's a structure to the way that you're approaching each of these things. And they know if they have a question, hey, where is the feedback mechanism for this project? Oh, it's structured the exact same way. Here it is. We use all the same tool. We do it in the same manner.
Yeah. And I think, so going on that, having some sort of system, having some sort of thing, and it's a whole know thyself, right? Knowing is the beginning of wisdom. I mean, I think if you know where you're at and you're looking towards making things better, and you're always kind of in that mode, then you're always going to be figuring out ways to do it. But if you're not even paying attention to having that there, you don't have anything, that's when you start to have issues. And so I think, once you have a system in place, then it's just a matter of figuring out, as you mature, is auditing that and saying, okay, is the system working internally and externally? And how do I know whether it's working or not?
Right. Is it too much? Is it not enough? But here's an example. This is super generic, but just thinking about, it should be part of that model. Like we had you've done the same thing. We have an official like launch meeting. Like this is the kickoff, the launch. Here's the scope. Here's what's going on. Here's the milestones. Here's the communication model for that. Like that's part of the communication strategy, to say that we have weekly technical reviews. Anybody's always invited to come in. Here's where the project, all the notes, the meeting notes, everything is going to be shared and available. We're going to be using this tool. Like we're going to be communicating via Microsoft Teams here. If someone needs access, this is where it is. We'll be tagging in this way. On a weekly basis, we'll do this. We'll have then a milestone review that will do like a mini post-mortem of the milestone and improve on the process for the next milestone that's already started. And at the end of everything, there's that post-mortem, which is what went right, what went wrong, what did we learn, how are we on budget, on time, on personnel, kind of all those things. But you have all of that discussion. It sounds like a lot, but you go and you do that. The more that you do it, the more efficient you are. People then have clarity. They then build trust into you and that system because they know it's being handled. They don't have to then ask, hey, I asked this question a month ago and I've never seen a response. That is a horrible thing to hear especially from an executive stakeholder in a project.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a lot. I mean, I think it's easy. It sounds like a lot, but I mean, the truth of the matter is what's worse is exactly that is like it starts an email storm or a month down goes the road. And then you end up having to have a 2-hour call to try to, tease apart all what's going on. And you end up putting a lot more work into trying to get things back on track. Whereas had you just had these little digestible moments along the way, it's not a lot. It's a little tiny bit to say, every little bit, let's just have a little quick recap and keep going. And then that way, if there's something, and this kind of goes back to lean methodology, right? Is the idea is if something's going wrong, let's pull the cord right now. Let's stop the whole thing. Let's solve the problem. Let's deal with the blocker. Let's do whatever needs to be done. Let's change the direction, whatever it is that needs to happen. Instead of getting all the way down the road and finding out, oh, we did all the wrong things and now we have to redo everything. I think those little digestible moments along the way make so much more sense communication wise.
Yeah, the longer you take to resolve an issue, to identify and resolve, the greater the impact and the cost. Yeah, it again from a cultural standpoint, there's 2 points on that. One, people have to be comfortable with asking hard questions or providing bad news, negative feedback. It has to be part of it. I always say it's like you have to be clinical in your approach.
Yes.
Like the doctor coming to you and say don't beat around the bush, doctor. Tell me, do I have cancer? Like you need to be upfront. Otherwise, hey, you could be malpractice lawsuit against that. So, one, you have to, that's something you have to be aware of. Are people afraid to bring bad news, which could delay and cost more? The other side of it is that the more that you practice this kind of communication, then the more that you cultivate your culture to be one where people are willing to and happy to they understand that, hey, the appropriate place for this is bring this right to the manager right now. It's urgent versus this is something that needs to be on the agenda for the next meeting versus, hey, we'll discuss this in my feedback in the postmortem. Like there's no right or wrong answer. Well, there are wrong answers too, depending on what the
go back to fighting fires. You're not chasing fires anymore. Instead, you're saying, hey, I smell smoke. I'd like to talk about it. How can we make sure that this doesn't turn into a problem? Or I recognize that there is a problem. Do we need to go deal with it right now? But what you're doing is you're providing, like you said, you're providing a cultural shift to people being aware of things early on and dealing with them early on in the proper place and time so that you're not dealing with those fires, in different ways and people aren't chasing them and not knowing what's going on. Everybody kind of stays on that same pulse together. And so everything just runs a lot more efficiently. So for those of you guys who think that you're going to save money by not having status meetings, I promise you it is money well invested, because at the end of the day, if you don't do those status calls, you will spend far more later in rescoping, solving problems, chasing issues, fighting fires, cleaning up messes than you ever would have in those little tiny amounts of status updates along the way. That's just my 2 cents.
Yep. No, completely agree. Yeah, it's I would say on the people management side of things too, how critical it is to, I know that as a group manager, one of the most important roles was to talk with each of my team leads and each of my direct reports about the projects they're working on, and when they would make comments, be like, this isn't really working, I'd be like, have you provided that feedback? I would push them towards following that process. Again, that's part of that cultural change, part of that nurturing to get people to use the tools, use the process, follow that, and to speak up around things. I realize that there's different types of employees that some people are just not comfortable. They'll never raise their hand in a group setting, and so having different feedback mechanisms, the one-on-one, the anonymous feedback form, As much as I hate them, they're also, they're great. People are very brave when they don't have when they're anonymous and it's through.
Hey, but there's an element of truth in all of that stuff too that you got to take.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot. There's more as far as feedback as well. We'll probably get into this, and we should probably do
its own session.
Yeah, there could be its own just another topic around this.
Sounds like a great topic.
Incorporating more into your project, but I think it all comes down to having a process, following that process, and building a culture where people are comfortable to talk and to share.
I want to reiterate that. I want to 100% back you up on that, is that I think often, we feel like the only options are to say positive things. And I think it's really funny in the retail world how much, it's the same thing. Like people only complain, right? That a lot of times they don't say positive things. But what's the opposite is internal and corporate, especially, is that the only thing we're allowed to say is positive things. And so it's harder to kind of get those constructive feedback. And my only addition to this is, yes, I think we should encourage people to bring up areas where there could be improvement, but always come constructively, right? Always come with this is a pain point and here's how I think we should solve it, or here's what I think we need to do. Or even if I understand this is a pain point and here's what I know about it, and maybe I don't know how to solve it, but I know that this is the problem. Always come to your clinical point, always come constructively, never come complaintively.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, because you may not have the answer. Like, I don't know the answer to this. Like, this is just a problem. Like, this is why bringing it to this group, because with your different focus areas, your backgrounds, this is what we need to solve. And again, it goes back to the problem at the beginning is IT making decisions without talking to people who know the data, that know the customer, that know that have the history in this area, in the business. And then, IT trying to make decisions, by fiat. Like, no, you need to talk to the people on the ground that have that experience.
And for those new people on the call who are learning all the words, these are the things that go on your risks and issues list. So when you have those meetings, like the things we're talking about right here, the things that people bring up, if your risk and issues list is empty, you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, it's like you got even the basic SWOT analysis of going and looking at for problem solving. And I know there's a lot of different models that are out there, but the very basics of that, if you go in there and define, here's what we know that's good, here's what we know that is negative, here are the risks of the things that can happen if we don't solve it, but here's the opportunity for us to go and expand on this if we do it right, and then make a decision. It's again, you can't make that decision if you have no information. And that's why feedback loops are so critical.
I know we're running tight on time, but I really would love to cover this future trends and innovation piece, because I want to talk about it for just a second.
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
I'm really excited. I mean, we think about what's the future of work, and what's funny is, we've talked about modern work and how modern isn't so modern. But I do think there's a shift coming again, right there with all the AI stuff and all the generative modeling and things that are coming up with predictive analytics and stuff like that. I think there is something to be said for, we don't know what we don't know all the time. And a lot of people come to me and, oh, well, is AI going to take my job, or is AI going to do my work for me? And I feel like those are neither one of those is going to happen probably. What AI is going to do is it's going to help us do our jobs better, in my opinion. And I think one of the ways, as we talk about communication and as we talk about stakeholders and feedback and all of those types of topics, I think one of the things that has been really helpful for me in terms of AI is asking it to help me think through the things that I don't know. Because oftentimes in the past, we've had to have somebody more senior with more experience and come and say, okay, you don't know what you don't know, so here's what you need to know. But it's all based on their curated experience. And I think the thing that AI brings us is more global experience and more open-minded experience, that it's not limited to one person. And so if we take that kind of groupthink experience and we say to it, I don't know this, I don't understand this, but I'd like to be better at it. And what are some ways that maybe I can think about how I should be asking my stakeholders things, or what kind of communication should I be giving my stakeholders? Can you help me create a communication plan? I did this just the other day for something I was working on, and I've done it many times. Like I could have done it from scratch. It would have taken me longer, but I simply went into an AI tool and said, I'm helping on this thing. I'm trying to create a communication plan. Can you give me a basic structure to start
Yep.
from? And it was like, absolutely. And it was like, here's all the primary stakeholders I would expect to be here. Here's all the communication types. Here's the things you need to do. And I'm like, this just saved me like 80% of my time. And I'm still going to have to think through it. But it did a big portion of it for me with experiential knowledge that maybe I wouldn't have had in my role.
I did something similar where I had written an article and then I read something else that had a different perspective. And I went in and I asked the AI tool to look at my body of content and then look at the secondary content and say, based on the secondary, like what should I pay attention to? How does this differ? In what ways does this differ? And what are other questions I could go back to this person with? It is fantastic for that, for fighting patterns and behaviors, to identify, hey, here's a gap that you may not have identified in all of this. So yeah, I think that there's a future episode where we talk nothing about but about the AI tools and how to leverage that. And I think it's we're already, like I did, as you know, I'm running workshops now on leveraging that over in leveraging AI tools for content creation and project management. Like it's already part of what I'm out there actively discussing.
There's a lot of fodder for content around that.
There's a lot of stuff. So, well, that's it for this week. Again, I'll put the contact info up on there. If you're not already following Sharon and I, please go out and follow us out on X. And of course, you can find us under our names under all of the social platforms, LinkedIn. Hey, if you're not connected with us on LinkedIn, please connect with us, but include a note that said, hey, got an episode of your show, or if you know us through something else, always attach a note, people, when you're going to reach out. And then, of course, all of the past episodes are available out on YouTube. So you can find that by topic. There's a lot more coming. As Sharon and I have talked about in a couple of episodes, I mean, we've got about 3 years of content. We're just at the start of this. There's a lot that's coming up. We have huge plans. So this is just the start. We're in phase 1, folks. And then, of course, if you have best practices or topics you'd like us to cover, you can go in and leave us a note and join the conversation out on Facebook and Facebook group around Project Failure Files. And with that, Sharon, I guess next week we'll see you, and everybody back every Monday, always at 9 a.m. Pacific. You'll catch the latest episode of Project Failure Files.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody, and bye.
See you next time.